Starting soon. Royal Blue podcast.
Where's your enthusiasm, Chris? Come on, mate. You know, been off for a fortnight. You should have plenty of zest and energy.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest edition of the Royal Blue podcast. I'm your host, Chris Beesley, joined by my Echo colleague, Joe Thomas, and regular guest, Gavin Buckland. Although it's been pointed out to me already that it's probably the first time in a long time that the three of us have been together. So we try and be a bit of a holy trinity for you in that respect and live up to your expectations. Joe's already berated me for not showing enough zest after my recent time away, so I'll try and keep those energy levels up.
or maybe the Grealish and Jai Dewsbury Hall of podcasting, maybe.
Yeah,
to bring
that one for the teenagers.
Yeah, absolutely.
How are you, Joe?
Yeah, no, I'm all right. Glad to be back in the studio doing a proper podcast. And a lot of listeners have been wondering where we have been during the busiest period of the year. That's what happens when your key personnel decide to take it off. someone had to stay and do Mansfield and Wolves and transfer deadline day. And well, I had quite a nice time in the end because Everton have had quite a nice time over the past few weeks, haven't they? So it feels so rare to enter an international break, particularly in August, in a happy note. Because
many years.
it's been a long, normally it's about now that I'm dusting off the when can I do my manager under pressure already?
Wow.
Match report. If we look at the last few years, wasn't it? I think. So yeah, I mean, how long has it been since Everton won one game in August, let alone two in the league? It's the first time of me doing this. Me doing in this role, so yeah, like unusually carefree and happy and positive because it feels like there's plenty to be positive about at the moment.
Absolutely,
yeah, definitely. And as we said, we will talk about reflect on that transfer window closing, the summer transfer window. More business, obviously, on the final day with Merlin Roll arriving at Hill Dickinson Stadium. I loved his attempt to up the toffees. It was very, very enthusiastic in those Teutonic tones, as it were. But Joe, just we start obviously with the latest. Vitaly Mykolenko reported on duty for Ukraine, who plays France tonight, and he's left the camp injured. I mean, been a few of these with Mykolenko in and out in recent times.
Yeah, it's a real problem, isn't it? I think, and it really, we know reported as such that towards the very back end of the window, Moyes' attention kind of shifted from some of the areas that I think we were expecting to get done. I think we'll talk about the window later, and I think there are still a few gaps in the squad and places where I think ideally we'd have liked to see a little bit more business. But I think he became quite concerned about the situation on the left side of defence, because obviously you've got Jared Branthwaite there, who normally sits on the left centre-back role, and Vitaly Mykolenko. And obviously Branthwaite's had a couple of injuries over the past year all of a sudden. But Mykolenko must be, I mean, I've lost count there. This might be I mean, we're yet to kind of officially hear the extent of what his issue is right now. And obviously, Everton don't play for a while yet, obviously until next weekend. So there's nothing to say that he's necessarily out of that. But this might be number 6 or 7 for Mykolenko in the past 18 months. It all started with the derby, didn't it? The derby, he got injured in the home derby under Sean Dyche back in April of last year. Carried on till half time, did really well. And since then, it's basically been a case of just getting him back. And I think because he's so important to both Everton and to Ukraine, I think both parties are often kind of willing to try and get him there as soon as possible because he is so key, and he hasn't had a prolonged break for quite some time, has he? So yeah, it is a problem, and we've seen already at the start of the season that he has an outsized value to Everton's squad, because the minute he comes out, everything just kind of falls apart a little bit. And I know they beat Brighton, but they rode their luck against Brighton.
Yeah.
You know, James Garner worked hard. He obviously got a goal in that game, but he was clearly a player, square peg in a round hole at Leeds, and clearly the same case against Brighton. And not only did he do that, but and I guess with Merlin Roll joining, Everton have a little bit more they have a few more options in centre midfield if James Garner gets pulled out to either left back or right back now. Well, they have one extra option. But it really isn't a happy thing for what it does to the squad. So Mykolenko is going to be someone that, I think they're going to have to pay careful attention to over the coming week, and managing him over the coming weeks, because you also have the situation where Adam Asnu, he's had an injury-plagued start to the season, played 80 minutes for the under-21s earlier on in this week, so that's obviously progress. But I think we also saw from his outing at Roma, where he came on early, because obviously Mykolenko picked up another injury. Yeah. He did look a little bit raw. So, even if he was fully fit, I'm not convinced that Moyes would necessarily have played him over Garner or someone else at left back. So, this is clearly a concern, because there are a few players in that side who, if they come out of that, I'm not necessarily saying that Mykolenko is one of the best players at Everton team, because I don't think he is. But I think there are a few. I'm not sure there is actually another player. Maybe Idrissa Gueye, I'd say, who, if you took them out of their position, everything else falls apart as dramatically as it does with Mykolenko.
Yeah, I mean, Statman Gav's been wowing us before we came on there. His party piece. You give him your date of birth. You tell you what day it was. I was a Thursday, by the way. Joe was a Friday, apparently. But I'll put this stat at you, Gav. That Mykolenko in his three full seasons. The three full seasons he's had at Everton, he has actually topped. He's done 30 plus games in all comps in each three of those games. So he is available a lot of the time. But as Joe's pointed out, there's these niggles and they keep reoccurring. So it's a concern.
Before Joe started speaking there, I was just thinking back exactly the same. He's not really been sensible. He's been 100% fit since April 24, because he had that Ukraine were trying to play him, weren't he? And did he play in the Euro? I can't remember.
Played the final game.
What happened was, obviously he ended the season injured at Everton. He was then brought back and played a friendly in the lead up to the Euros for Ukraine. Got injured again.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah,
and then came back, just about made some of the tournaments.
The final group game.
And then you pre-season isn't the best, and you're struggling, aren't you? So that's like 18 months now, hasn't it? And I can only agree. It shows you when you look at the squad and you see the first 11, whatever, and you think, well, okay, left back we got Mykolenko, but actually this just shows you the importance of having a ready-made backup in every position. That doesn't mean moving somebody else from elsewhere in the team, doesn't it? Really. And that causes a problem, and it's made even worse by the fact that actually, Branthwaite's occasionally covered at left back, hasn't he? Yeah. Being injured. And I think this was the difference, possibly even against Wolves compared to what's gone before, is if Grealish plays wide left, he comes inside, you need a left-footed fullback, don't you, to bomb down the wing, to take advantage of the space that's created. And if you got two right-footed players playing on the left, you lose that dynamic a little bit, And it is a solitary lesson about the importance about having a ready-made substitute, as it were, for every position. And I think we could struggle at a time when, as you say, Asnu's been injured. We've got central defensive issues. We've got a right back problem, obviously, that's been spoken about, and we'll speak about when we talk about transfers. And you've gone from, all of a sudden, you've gone from the start of the summer, I think the defence does need a lot of work, maybe a little bit either way. All of a sudden, we've got issues, haven't we, babe? We've got our 4-2 centre-half playing. We've got a centre-half playing at right back. We haven't got a left back 3 games into the season. But as Joe quite rightly says, it doesn't necessarily mean he's going to be out for any length of time. It might just be a precaution.
I think because I do think that Everton, I think Moyes has the luxury of being able to do this right now with his squad. If I'm there right now, and I'm surprised he didn't play at left back at the start of the season, But given how many options Everton now have going forward, I'd be giving very serious thought to trying to work with McNeil on the training ground to see if they can get into a situation where they're content with playing him at left back. I think it makes so much of a difference having a natural left-sided player there. Even if you're not expecting them to do much attacking, just from a distribution perspective, they can do so much. With genuine people to aim for going forward, we know that McNeil's strength is that he's got a wand of a left foot. You also have him on the pitch for set-piece delivery. That's actually been quite good because Dewsbury Hall's pretty good at them as well. But bearing in mind that McNeil as an attacking midfielder, he isn't someone that gets to the byline and tries to beat people. He's almost like Moyes, Dyche almost used him as almost like a defensive winger, didn't he?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think we could all see a scenario where he'd probably be able to play wing back relatively comfortably.
Yeah.
I think if you're conditioned, bearing in mind how low the threshold for doing okay at left back would be if Mykolenko's not there. And Mykolenko didn't have a very good game against Wolves in the end either. Obviously, big mistake for the goal that let them back into it, which may or may not be because he wasn't 100% fit. I guess if we're being fair to him, that might be something that we have to take into consideration. Although I would say the mistake was probably more concentration than fitness related. It wasn't like he was beaten to the ball or outpaced, was it? He switched off, I think. But you have the luxury of doing that because obviously Grealish is your first choice on the left wing. You've got Ndiaye who can play there. Alcaraz has played there. Keenan Dewsbury Hall as well. Everton have lots and lots of options going forward. They have that ability now where you can perhaps look at McNeil and isolate him on the training ground and say, because obviously he's fallen down the pecking order so far, like he's not anywhere near that left wing or number 10 position, and he isn't looking on the right now because he's got Ndiaye and Diblin ahead of him. So you've got that freedom to say, well, why don't we just have a couple of weeks working with him? Because if he can turn himself into a left back, he can very quickly make himself very important to this team.
Yeah. Just a few comments we've had coming in on this issue. And Glenn Rainton said to decide who should go left back, the question should be, what's the least disruptive option to the whole team? Is it Asno to keep Garner in midfield or Garner at left back with Tim or Robenham or
It's a very
Merlin
sensible
replacing him?
question, I think, or point. And I think that was perhaps the problem with the Brighton. Again, I know they beat Brighton, but with the Brighton and the Leeds performances, it wasn't so much what Garner could or couldn't do at left back. It was the problem that you then removed Garner from the central midfield and had Tim Robenham there instead. And Robenham has some good qualities, but he's not particularly disciplined, and he's not someone that, if you're going to have teams that are coming at you, you necessarily want him alongside Idrissa Gueye working in tandem. And as a result of that, Everton got kind of exposed both in the middle and out wide, and that's the issue.
Yeah. It changes Idrissa Gueye's role then, doesn't it? So you swap them one for one, but actually it changes what Gueye can do. Does that support Joe's thesis of McNeil then, the least disruptive option?
Well, we've also had people saying here, Roy Nixon, Adam Asno is a full international with 3 caps. He played against Barcelona last season. I would start him against Villa. Whereas James Graham remarks, Asno should defo start. It's just fitness, I think. Now, the thing, Gav, with Asno, I think David Moyes was at pains to say this from when the moment he came in. He might have, those 3 caps from Morocco, and he was obviously playing at Bayern Munich, so he's come from a big successful team. That Moyes was at pains to say he's one for the future, and he's perhaps not ready just quite at the moment.
That's your answer, isn't it? Really, if he is fit, I think we'll be looking at other alternatives. And I think I get the McNeil one. Depends. I suppose it might depend who we're playing as well, and the strength of the opposition right side. Might determine that choice. To be fair, but I think this is obviously something that they may need to address in January. It's Mykolenko's last year of his contract as well, isn't it? Yeah, which is an interesting one, isn't it?
There's a few, isn't there?
Obviously Garner and Tarkowski, the other ones, aren't they? So I think McNeil possibly, but it's just that we've gone from a position that looking strong defensively at the start of the transfer window to a few gaps there now, isn't it? Where we could end up in the next game only having one player in the proper position that were the back four.
Yeah, and just on Asno again, context is important. Obviously, he's got an incredible history and heritage going through Barcelona and Bayern Munich. But his games last season were in La Liga for Real Valladolid, where we finished bottom of the league. So I mean, it may well have been a very good learning curve for him, but he's probably still on that learning curve. And going from La Liga to the Premier League is also going to be a real challenge as well. So I think what we would like to, ideally, I think what we'd hope to have is Mykolenko fully fit or a senior alternative that can do a job, and you can just bring in Asnu as and when you're in a situation where ideally Everton are in the last 5 minutes of that game at Wolves and they're 3-1 up, not 3-2 up, and then you can bring him in and you can just do that in cup games, so that maybe by the end of the season you're not going into the summer looking for left back because all of a sudden Asnu's 20, he's played 15 games in the Premier League, had a few starts in the cup, and you go, actually, we've got someone to work with here. I think that's probably the ideal situation, but I just don't really see there being anything to lose with trying that with McNeil, because you're not pulling him out of any position of importance at the minute, because he's and for him it's that or not getting a game, isn't it?
McNeil might actually agree to it at a drop of a hat, might if it means getting onto the pitch.
Possibly, and then once he's on the pitch, with set pieces and with his distribution from deep, especially if you've actually got some runners for once. We know he can be an intelligent player. You do pick up those other additional benefits as well. So,
well, players kind of always say this, but when I spoke to Dwight McNeil in New Jersey in pre-season, he admitted this is just a huge season for him as well as the team. But he also said he played wherever the team would need him. I mean, it's a bit of a stock answer, isn't it? He was aware of the magnitude of this season, and that's before Jack Grealish and Dewsbury Hall came through the door as well, which put him further down the pecking order. I mean, we'll move on, but I'll just have a couple of final comments from the viewers on this. Nashi FC says, if Asnu's not ready to fill in on matches like this, then I'm starting to wonder why we signed him. I heard Rolls played left back before, but a tough one to play on that position on my debut. I mean, I'd heard that before about Merlin Roll, but I'd looked at that and it was more of a sort of a left side of midfield than a true full back position.
I think the other thing as well is with this is that so it's a big year for James Garner as well. Also in his last year of his contract, and really I think this is a year where I thought it was a big summer for him, but Everton didn't really improve in central midfield in the way that I thought they would. So he's still in a position where, I mean, obviously Merlin Roll's come in now, so that might change. He might have a bit of competition for starting place, depending on how Roll settles in. But between those two and Idrissa Gueye, all three of them are going to see a lot of minutes, because we saw the other day how even in a situation which was as dicey as it was at Wolves, Moyes ended up taking off Idrissa Gueye for the last 15 minutes because I asked him afterwards and he said it was because of needed some freshness in the middle. So they're all going to see game time. I am really interested to see if Garner can step into a player who goes from a kind of 6 out of 10 useful presence that he's been for the last few years without ever really commanding a game or being a match-winning presence in the middle. Can he step that up? And because I think he had a good finish to pre-season. I think that Moyes always seems to start to trust him in a little bit of a deeper role in front of the defence. And I thought he was really, really good in that position against Wolves last season. Last weekend. There were other people who obviously commanded the headlines because of what they achieved going forward in that game. But I thought that James Garner was very good in that match. And that's it. If you then have him, he's a player that's probably been a little bit of a victim of his own versatility. It's a blessing and a curse sometimes for him. And if you end up in a situation where you're pulling him out of left back, it's not just what you do to the centre midfield, it's not just what you lose at left back, but it's also potentially hampering him from taking that next step and maybe making the case to say that he can actually be a part of Everton's midfield in the future.
Yeah. Just finally on this one, John Riley says, don't do a Patterson on Asnu. He's young, but so what? He has good experience for his age, and he is a left back, not a square peg in a round hole. But we've obviously discussed.
Yeah, I think. Like I say, if he's fit, there's a compelling argument to have him, even if he's not ready. Again, certainly over Garner or another square peg in a round hole. It's just trying to work out everything around him. Yeah,
and Dave Hollingsworth says Jimmy Garner has the bit between his teeth. Whatever Moyes does, I hope he leaves him in midfield. So, the transfer window, the summer transfer window, is now firmly slammed shut. Is that copyright? Sky Sports, that one. But it was a bit early. It was a bit earlier this year, wasn't it? Although, obviously, as Joe has pointed out, holding the fort there, I think the confirmations didn't come until a bit later on. But and Everton that seems to do a nice sort of staggering of that later on in terms of the releases. One additional one. So, I mean, again, going back to pre-season, Joe, I mean, I was in the room that night in Manhattan when David Moyes did that drop the mic moment that I want 9 or 10 new faces through the door, much to the approval of the of the audience there. I mean, manager saying he wants to sign lots of players. That's always going to go down well with supporters. But this summer more than ever in terms of the rebuilding job that needed to be done. He ended up getting 9 through the door. I mean, 2 of those were understudy goalkeepers, but then there was 2 understudy goalkeepers who had left. I mean, where do you assess it now that that's closed?
Yeah, I think it was a good window.
Yeah.
Angus Kinnear, the new CEO, was always very clear that the judgment should come on September the 2nd. And I think in fairness to him, once you got to that point, so there were issues, and Moyes has been very keen to stress himself to acknowledge that there were issues. Business got started a lot later than I think he liked. I think really what happened was they went in stages, and they probably took a long time sorting out those expiring contracts and trying to work out who to keep, who not to keep. Obviously, Coleman had an offer on the table pretty early doors, but I think with Keane and with Idrissa Gueye, and also with with Calvert-Lewin, I think there were just talks that were basically going on and off throughout just to see whether or not they could get him. Perhaps they needed to be a little bit more decisive on that front to then give them the chance to go earlier. But they were always going to have to wait until July to really start doing business for PSR, and they were always going to have to. I think when you're a team that wants to be upwardly mobile like Everton, and I think when you have the ambition. Moyes has big ambitions for Everton, but can also be quite a cautious manager. So you kind of get caught in that trap where you have to go for players that you have to accept that there are going to be good players that don't want to come to Everton because it's still very early stages in the project. But if you want Premier League quality and known quantities, then basically one thing you have to kind of do is you have to wait until the likes of Man City and Chelsea and those clubs that have hoovered up the bigger, hoovered up the talent, and that at some point during the window they'll settle on normally when their pre-season kind of gets underway properly, they'll settle on who their core group is, and then there'll be a load of excess, and then you can take your pick and go from, which is what I've done with Grealish and with Dewsbury Hall. You're kind of waiting for that to come into play, and because of the Club World Cup for both those clubs, I think that delayed things a little bit further as well. So, it was an interesting window, and I think it's a good window. I think you can only do so much. Like you can't do everything, and you can't do everything. But I think they did a pretty good job of it. They needed to address creativity. Creativity was obviously the big thing, and they've certainly done that. We've seen a good start from that already, haven't we? So, I would have liked to see a right back. The left back issue is one that's kind of emerged over the course of the summer, but that's where we are now. And I'd like to probably see another right winger and a centre midfielder as well. But I mean, that would have been asking for a lot. Merlin Roll's an interesting one at the end of the window. Pleased to see him come in. He had injuries last season, didn't he? Which didn't help. So I think he comes in as a little bit of an unknown quantity, and I would have liked to have seen like a proper defensive midfielder, and I'm not sure he's quite that, but there's no doubt that the squad's better than it was at the end of last season. The ceiling is definitely higher, isn't it? So.
Absolutely.
How do you assess it, Gav?
Yeah, if it was marking out to 10, I'd probably say 7.5.
Yeah.
Closer to 8 than 7. I think the gaffes for me are... I think actually Tony Scott said pretty much the same thing on Wednesday. I think obviously right back is a given, isn't it? I do think we're a little bit light up front. I think with the sale of Timothy as well has exacerbated that. I think Beto and Barry are the similar profiles, aren't they, strikers, and sometimes you want something that's a little bit different, another striker that can give you something else. Barry is still very much learning his trade, and Beto is just well Beto. Yeah. And we are, let's face it, we're just speaking about Mykolenko, but we are an injury or two away from having a headline that reads striker crisis at Everton, aren't we? So I think we're a striker short, somebody with Premier League experience. But I think I always my favourite subject when it comes to transfers. Though I really appreciate the young talent that's been brought in, Diblin and Barry and that type of stuff. I still think we got a shortage in the squad of like that golden
players in their peak years.
24 to 28, 29. And we've addressed that. I mean, it's interesting that Grealish and Dewsbury Hall have been brought in, that addresses that to a point. But I still think there's a squad imbalance, but that'll take time to work through. Having said that, I do think our first choice 11 has got mostly experience. Like we saw the Wolves last week, has got Premier League experience within 24 and above. So that's not a particular worry, but I'd probably call the 7.5, 8 on 10 for me, which I think is good. Be interesting to see they do anything in January. I was saying to Joe, which is the more interesting point for me is I got my abacus out this morning.
Okay.
And I think that the squad cost, considering all this getting rid of the people we got rid of in the summer and the players that we've added during the transfer window, I think that our squad cost is probably about £35 million more than last season, which sounds a lot, but if you think about it with Bramley Moore and other things, we're maybe going to get other sponsorship deals, maybe get another £55-60 million next year.
Yeah.
So that pays for that. So if you think about it, this is where the whole transfer window makes sense for me.
Mm-hmm.
You get an extra 60 million next year.
Yeah.
Use 35 million of that to increase the squad costs. Another 25 million will be pay off the loan they've got against Bramley Moore, the interest on that.
Okay.
So that fits perfectly into the extra money we get from Bramley Moore. So it's all right very well saying we need a new right back and centre forward. You may not be able to afford that if you look at it that way. We may keep our powder dry. So 7.5, 8 on 10. Bit panicky, wasn't it, in America? But I think it's not only that, isn't it, numbers, but it's the quality of the people that we brought in. We brought in attacking players, haven't we, that get people off the sheets. Showing once again that Moyes places so much faith, doesn't he, in all the teams, West Ham and Everton the first time round, in that three behind the striker. That's where he wants his quality on the pitch. And he's done that in spades, I think, and that's been reflected in the last two performances, hasn't it? Really. So from not only the player, the players we brought in, and the number, it's where they are on the pitch is important. It would be interesting to see whether in January maybe I think six going for 3 places behind the striker seems one too many for me, and it'd be interesting to see. We were talking about McNeil, and it'd be interesting to see the future of McNeil really in that context. But makes a lot of sense what we've done, a lot of sense financially, and I'm happy. 7.5, 8 on 10.
Yeah, we've had a comment here from Eltel on the banks of the Royal Blue Mersey. Says, we had directors of football who brought poor players. Moyes knows the market and he brought in quality football players for the first time in a long time. I mean, obviously the caveat of the funds is a good big thing in that. This so reminds me of Man City at the start. Well, that's quite a bold statement. But what we, as Gav's just alluded to, Joe, in the right back issue, obviously we know they went for Kenny Tete early in the window and that one didn't get over the line. But we've also seen if Moyes can't get the players he wants, it doesn't mean that he... Obviously, you're going to have a list of players, A, B, and C, or whatever. But if he doesn't think he can get the one he wants, he won't just fill it for the sake of it.
No. Well, I think we've seen that over the course because of this window, because they could have got a lot more business done a lot earlier if they were just willing to take what was out there. And it's a gamble because I think that the size of the squad rebuild that needed at Everton, I mean, one of the things they did just actually need this summer was just bodies through the door, because so many they already had a small squad and they were letting go. And I think that, obviously they left. It was late in the window that they got Tyler Diblin, but that right wing was a glaring hole for a long time, was it? As well as right back, and I think that, I mean, maybe context is a little bit. Maybe there's a bit of context here, and it looks like Moyes has probably always thought that Ilman and Dye could play on the right, so maybe the need wasn't as great as perhaps some of us saw it. And once you have Grealish and Dewsbury Hall come in that can operate off the left and central left, then you free up Ndai to go and do just that, don't you? So yeah, I mean, I do wonder whether or not that they might have. There's almost a gamble in doing nothing, in not getting a player or two in, and I do think they are one or two short. I say, if they had another left back, if they had another right wing, if they had another central midfielder, I'd be a lot more content. But 9 is a lot, and if you get to 10, 11, 12, that's even more. So balancing it all together, like, it was never going to all come into play in one window. I think there was an element of opportunism about this window as well. You have to accept going into a transfer window that you're dealing with global forces, aren't you? And you might have a list of the players that you want and who you want, but there's only so much that you can control. You have the knock-on effect of the deals that are going on around all over the world, and I think that Grealish to an extent is an opportunistic move when he became up and they got him and he's the icing on the cake. And I think probably the same with Merlin Roll a little bit as well. They started to look at Thomas Souček again towards the end of the window. They couldn't get him, so they started to move for that. So yeah, it's interesting. But you also have that, and you can kind of see the dual strategy at play this summer, where because you're building for the future, if you want to be sustainable, you can't just buy for now. You've got to buy for the future as well. We've seen how, in an era of PSR and that financial regulation, we've seen how the likes of Newcastle and Villa have found it quite straightforward to go from almost go from 0 to 100 and go from a mid-table club or a bottom half-table club to a European club. The problem is then sustaining it when all of a sudden that next season you need so many more players to be able to competitive on the front to try and you want your European ambitions, but you also want to try and make sure that you qualify again for Europe in the Premier League, and then you also have to try it, but you can't just go and spend money just for you can't just spend the money that you do have because you have those regulations. And one of the ways of trying to get around that is by making sure that you invest in players that are young that can grow with you. So one, you're investing in talent in the future. So they can take you to the next levels in the stages that they grow, but also that potentially down the line, if they grow in value, you can also make the money off them to reinvest in the squad. And that's where we see the likes of your Asnus and maybe your Tierno Barrys as well. So it's not always about buying players. And there are so many cross purposes that it's tricky. It's tricky.
It's a good point. Interesting point from Joe, and I think it's relevant to Everton because we spoke at the start of the season about where Everton will finish, and there was quite we're relying. Will the clubs that done well last season that have finished above us that perhaps you wouldn't necessarily expect to, your Brentfords and stuff like this. But you do wonder now whether for a club in the Premier League, if you're not in the Big Six, whether it operates on a 3-year cycle, the PSR 3-year cycle. So you spend a load of money in the first year, that does you for the third year. Then you get to the end of the third year, you realise you've got to make a load of sales here to live within the PSR cycle. And I think like Newcastle and Aston Villa say are like that. And where I think for us, we're at the start of the 3-year cycle, aren't we?
Yeah.
And so you would expect then for us to be like where Aston Villa and Newcastle were 3 years ago. And as you say, what you've got to do then is you've got to manage that. And the way to manage that, I think people are realising this in the Premier League, is to operate the Chelsea model of buying a load of players and then just selling them for profits at certain points. And you can see what we're trying to do there. So I don't know about what you think about this. Is at the first 3 games of this season, looking at what's going on around the Premier League about who's been bought or who hasn't been bought, I'm a little bit more optimistic of where I think we'll finish now than what I was at the start of the season, because of this thing about like the 3-year cycle of football in the Premier League, where it's for people who've been successful for 3 years, expecting them to be successful may not be because of the PS as good as what we think because of PSR. We're at the other end of the scale, we're at the start of a 3-year cycle, and so we're all going to be brilliant for the next 3 years, I'm saying. But it is interesting, and also for us, it's also perfect storm, isn't it? Because we've got Bradley Moore at the same time. The extra income from that.
You also have the addition of having knowledge of the situation. Where I think that the way in which obviously Everton have been the victim of this to some extent over recent years, that there've been so many grey areas over how a lot of this stuff would play out. Obviously, Everton have found out to their detriment about how severe the punishments can be if you overstep the line. But having also seen that, but also what Newcastle and Villa and the struggles that they've had, Everton starting to now go into it with that knowledge, don't they, going forward of perhaps how to maybe better prepare for a move up the table under the regulations. And you also have the benefit of being able to learn from the likes of Chelsea and that, and see.
Which we have done, haven't we? I mean, we've got the guy in from City, haven't we?
Look at the loopholes that are available to you and things like that, and where you can be a little bit savvier because you can learn from not necessarily the mistakes, but the things that have dragged back other clubs that have been trying to do what Everton are now doing.
Yeah, as I said, we got the guy in from City, haven't we? Who was involved with them. Yeah, so I just think I'm a lot more optimistic. I mean, I still have my doubts about Grealish over the season, but I think it's been really good for the first 3 games. Excellence, and that trio's gelled straight away, hasn't it? Yeah, that's Dewsbury, Hall, NJ. Grealish had me doubts about NJ on the right, purely because he likes to cut in. It's like the opening of the Brighton game again. He cut in from the right, but it was a left-footed shot, which is not many. The same as him coming in from the left with a right-footed shot. But what it's enabled him to do, though, hasn't it? If he got strength on the left side, is he's just ghosting in at the far post, hasn't he?
Yeah.
He scored twice, 2 goal tap-ins at the far post. And I think he's got the natural instincts of a striker, I think, sometimes, NJ, because he has played up through the middle, hasn't he? And when I say about a striker shortfall, I'm just wondering in the back of his mind whether he thinks that if we had a striker shortage, whether NJ could be sort of a Jared Bowen.
Yeah, or even like the way Cahill or Fellaini.
Yeah. But I think his style's more similar to Jared Bowen in terms of a ball player.
Yeah.
Whether he thinks if we did have a bit of a problem up front, or even if we didn't, he just wanted to change things around, whether he'd maybe use NJ as a sort of Jared Bowen type player as a striker. So, and that's where we get the advantages of the strength and depth. So I'm a hell of a lot more optimistic about our wider ambitions now than what I was at the start of the season. I haven't seen what's happening elsewhere, and I think that's good,
There's a lot of chatter coming in here from the viewers. They're talking about free agents and stuff like that. Because obviously we mentioned Kenny Tete, but if there's a few now who haven't got clubs who could be picked up. But Mark Foster says, I seriously doubt that Moyes will look at the free agent market unless we're picking up another long-term injury. I mean, there are names being banded about here, Joe. What do you? Gav's mentioned about the finances as well. Do you think they'll stick with what they've got now in terms of that
I think
respect?
so. I mean, obviously, look. I mean, if Mykolenko's injury problems end up being worse than they anticipated, then I guess there's always a route down there. But I think that, I think Moyes would have been working towards having his squad in place for at the end of the transfer deadline, and that being a unit that you want to work with. If he hasn't gone for them now, bearing in mind how desperately Everton do need bodies, and some places in that squad are still, there are still gaps there, and they are in need of depth for those positions. If he hasn't gone for them now, they're probably not going to go for them, unless there's a situation where their wage. The issue has been their wages, and haven't seen the season start without getting a club. All of a sudden, their demands dropped considerably.
Yeah, there's just been a mention here about this new capital injected into Everton by the Roundhouse capital. Is that something that either of you are knowledgeable about in any terms?
It's just basically to fund, obviously over the summer, but buying players, aren't we? How much should we buy players? 100 million quid or something like that, the value. No, it's not going to pay 100 million quid up front. It's just basically support the purchase of players in cash terms, and also maybe a bit of a run on the club as well at the same time. It's nothing to be concerned about. It's not to the PSR that we need for, but we've got a shortfall. It's just an injection of shares from Roundhouse. Yeah. We're not necessarily just the freakins these days. We need to remember. So it's just something that is you would have expected because of the amount of money we've had to spend. We haven't physically got the cash in the business at this stage. Yeah, I mean, Gav just mentioned it, Joe. Just want to get your point on this. I mean, we've thought a lot of us have said all summer 2 right wingers was probably what's needed. Obviously, Harrison and Lindstrom are both gone from last season. But given what Gav's just said and how well Iliman and Dye has done on there, it's a role he plays for Senegal regularly. I mean, could you see that being the way things are going forward in terms of, obviously, Tyler Diblin's come in. He's very much a young player, a great prospect for the future, but there's so much competition on that left-hand side. McNeil's down the pecking order. Got Grealish there. Alcaraz can play there. See that, and Dyer's playing them all prominently.
Well, I mean, a lot of the sign. I mean, Everton have brought a lot of quality into their squad this summer. Quite where it all fits in and is trying to work is can be a little bit difficult. They're almost a bit cross purposes when you add Grealish to Dewsbury Hall and having inside Alcaraz earlier. It only really makes sense if Moyes is open to the idea of playing Ndai on the right. Yeah. Because otherwise they've loaded up on players in a position where Everton's best player was already, or one of their best players was already there. And I think perhaps when when you see the start to the season, you can take a degree of hope from Ndai on the right. I do think that he's a little bit unfortunate. I do think he's been moved across to his weakest position across the front three. But clearly, he's willing to work hard. And if you put the right quality of players around him, which he's now got, it looks like it could work as well. So and that's it. It's clear that Moyes is open to that as an idea. There's been nothing to say this season that it won't work. I was sceptical going into the year, but it started off okay. And if you can rotate him with Dyblin, then that's good. And obviously, Ndai will go. He's expected to go away to the Africa Cup of Nations, isn't he? So there'll be a big 6-7 game period there if Senegal go deep. where you'll need cover, and that's where someone like a Tyler Diblin can come in as well. And there's just competition for places all across. You look at that side now, all of a sudden, as standout as Grealish has been. If Grealish was to miss a game and there'd be a spot in that wide left position, you wouldn't panic. 'Cause you go, well, Ndai can play there, and you don't panic about the right. 'Cause you go, well, Diblin can play there, and you just think, it's just a luxury that I haven't had for some time.
Yeah, I'm just worried about going too deep down a rabbit hole here to finish. But there's a movement now across European football clubs, supporters, the backlash about the games being taken abroad. It's something the Premier League have said isn't on their agenda. Richard Masters says it's not in tray, but there are moves afoot to have a Serie A game in Italy, Australia, and the La Liga game in the USA. So,
did you know the one about they want Milan to play into Milan to play? Don't they? Is it Como? Is it in Perth? On the basis that the weekend that fixture was played, they've got the Winter Olympics.
In Milan.
So they said they can't play it, so we're going to play in Australia.
Yeah. Okay.
That was how desperate is that as an excuse, incessant.
But so your thoughts on that? Obviously, there's been a big backlash on that. I mean, I'm going to do a follow-up piece on that today. A lot of the American sports do it, but they're completely different, and we'll go into all those fixed reasons behind that. But football has always been, there's slightly deviations with the Scottish League, but mostly one game at home, one game away, and it's always been that since the start. The American sports are different. They either play loads of games like the baseball or the NFL where they don't play every one. Joe, it seems that there's a sort of a cross purposes here, and obviously with the increasing number of American owners, it is a concern despite what Richard Masters might say.
Oh, absolutely. I think if we know anything, football will move where the money is. That's what will happen. And look, Richard Masters and the Premier League are perhaps operating in a position of strength because all the money is in the Premier League. So these leagues that are willing to concede games to potentially take games overseas, they are doing that because they are trying to play catch up with the Premier League. Yeah. So that does give the clubs a degree of protection. But we'd be naive to say that it's definitely never going to happen, wouldn't we?
Yeah.
Gavin, your thoughts on it, and other than avoiding clashes with Winter Olympics.
Absolutely. Alexander Sefrin, the head of UEFA, said yesterday, didn't he, that it's not they involve themselves with, it's up to the individual
so kind of washing his hands of it.
The other thing is, though, that the regulator might have something to say about it in terms of that was one of the things they were brought in for. It's a bit like picking up on Joe's points, it's not something the Premier League needs to do financially. They're enormously cash rich. But the one thing we know about modern football is, and we've seen that the way supporters are being fleeced, is if you get an extra couple of million here and there, they'll bite. And although you just say the fixture list, you may say, well, hang on a minute, we're playing at home, but we lose home advantage when we're playing our game in America. And someone said, we'll give you an extra 10 million quid for playing in America. They're going to say, yeah, you're right, mate, yeah. So it's one of them things that I don't think is on the immediate horizon, but it's just part of why the thing about globalisation of football, like everything else, isn't it, really? And that's the wider point in all of this, isn't it? Is that I think with the Club World Cup and maybe even once every 2 years, and if you have a globalised club game and you've got like the European game and domestic games at domestic level, that's 3 levels of football. Yeah. And I think there's a feeling in football that you can only have 2, and that in time one of them will disappear. And this is perhaps down the rocky road to that, club level football as we know it disappearing in some respects. Because let's face it, if you've seen this with the Super League, if people can play more money, get more money playing globally than what they can do domestically, they'll do it. Yeah. And it's not going to happen in the next couple of years, but you're thinking, decade or so time, that'll definitely be the case. Because they're talking about an expanded Club World Cup with qualifying competitions. They're talking about having, even like the Super Cup, European, having like semi-finals for that, where the Europa League. And so there's just more and more games. Yeah. So something's got to give. And this is something as Everton fans, we have to be. Yeah. We have to understand, because this is where do we sit in all of this, and where do the Freakins think we sit in all of this? Because they've not done that. Bought Everton and taken. I know the stadium wasn't built by them as such. They argued they did fund some of it. Is they've done that with a specific aim, haven't they? And the aim is to be part of that, isn't it?
Well, if you miss the boat, you're part of kind of like a rump domestic
absolutely.
competition,
Let's
aren't
face
you?
it,
Yeah.
the Premier League.
The other thing as well is that it might not happen, or it might be some way off from happening. But if it doesn't happen, it's not going to be because the fans' interested in being put first.
No.
Is it? So, like,
Yeah.
But what we did see though in the Super League, though, isn't it? The fans may not be in their interest, but the fans collectively, I think that's what we're going to be seeing, aren't we? Can have enormous power in all this, don't they?
Yeah.
But,
I hope so.
But ultimately, is fandom in football the same as what it was 5 years ago? Perhaps not. It's just that people change, different generations, isn't it?
Yeah. I'm sorry to have to leave you on this sort of dystopian view of the future, but
it depends where you're coming from, isn't it?
Yeah.
You could be argued that actually if there was if football was developing in a different way, but why can't everyone be part of that?
Yeah.
Well, why not?
Well, there's changes afoot, it seems here. I was wary not to say this at the start, but this could almost be our final game at Goodison Park here for us today, because we're on the move here on the Royal Blue podcast. Not quite, the 2 miles from Walton to Vauxhall and the Mersey waterfront, just across the room. But we may, 99%, Ian Kroll tells me, chance that the next podcast, next time you see us, will be in our brand new shiny studio. So hopefully we've all got that to look forward to. I don't know if I will be able to buy the seat, Ian. I don't know if I'll be able to take this one with me. But yeah, so we'll just leave you on that one. Hopefully, we've not spoilt your weekend there with our dim views at the future.
But it's not dim now, is it? It depends on what side of the coin you want to look at.
Gav's all for it, by the sounds things.
It's not dystopian, I don't think.
So I've been your host, Chris Beesley, been joined by Joe Thomas and Gavin Buckland, and this has been the Royal Blue Podcast.